Hello and welcome back, adventurers. Today we are going to continue our ranking of the Runesmith runes, picking up for where we left off. So in our first video, we covered all of the level 1 runes. Today we're looking at levels 9 and 17, leaving our third video to cover the diacritic runes at 5 and 13. Real quick recap. What do we get with a rune, the type of runes we're talking about today? Well, you're going to have a usage, meaning what you can apply it to, a passive benefit that happens while it's applied to creature, armor, weapon, whatever, and the invoke, the result that occurs when you trigger it with an invoke action. I don't want to take too long setting this one up because it's probably looking at another long one, but I do want to bring up a couple things. So in a moment here, I'll talk about how I'm ranking these again, but I have to adjust it just a little bit here. In the beginning with level 1 runes, you're going to have those through the entire lifespan of your character, right? When we look at level 9, honestly, a lot of people are probably getting toward the end of their character's life cycle by that time because, most games end 10, 11, 12, something like that. And then there's the level 17s. You may never get there, but I'm still going to evaluate them because if you do get there, I want to have some thoughts for you. That being said, these are all ranked against those at their own level. I am not ranking the level 17 runes against the level 1 runes. Honestly, they'd probably all get S's if that were the case. And that's because the actual power level does seem to increase as we move these up. And I think they should. I think that's a great thing. So they're compared against their own level runes only. So just keep that in mind. Even though I'm covering both level 9 and 17, I'll make the distinction when we get there, and it'll almost be like resetting it, but not quite. That being said, let's talk really quickly about how I'm ranking these, and then we'll dive in. So up on the screen here, you can see how I am ranking these. S is a rune that feels strong when it becomes available and remains strong for the character's lifespan. Again, that was more important for a level 1, but still matters and should still be something you use for the rest of your character's lifetime when you do get it. It should definitely be worth etching if possible to etch. Some of obviously are meant to be used against enemies only, so you wouldn't etch those, but if possible, you would definitely want to etch this. And of course, you want to be able to trace it for the passive alone. You want to be able to trace it for the invoke. Basically, you want to use this as often as you can. A is a rune that, again, you will likely keep throughout, although you might stop using it. There might be something that replaces it basically for you. So maybe it falls off, but most of the time you're going to want to use it. It should have a very strong passive value or a really strong invoke, but they don't both have to be exceptional. They don't both have to be exceptional, but they both at least have to be good. A bad passive with a strong invoke isn't going to cut it for A. For B, though, you might have a weak passive and a strong invoke, or a strong passive and a weak invoke, and that's okay. It should still be a contender for use in many situations, but certainly not all. And it might be that you could go a combat or two or a session and not use it, but it still comes up a lot and you're still using it regularly enough. C is rune that's likely short-lived, meaning, yeah, you've got it in your repertoire, but you're really not using it anymore because other choices just seem to fit better most of the time. It should still have a purpose, but it just might be that the purpose is so niche that you only use it in very specific situations, and most of the time it just sits there in your repertoire wishing it was doing something. And D is one you should really avoid. It either would basically never come up, or the situation it applies to is just not that important, or it just takes away from the rest of what you're doing. If you were to etch it or trace it, you would have wasted your time. So D is avoid. That being said, let's go ahead and dive into our first rune at level 9, Astillu, Rune of Submersion. This is meant to be drawn onto a creature or armor. The passive here is while it's on you or you're wearing the armor, you can breathe underwater. Anybody who's got this, of course, can breathe underwater and gains a swim speed equal to their land speed or 30 feet, whichever is higher. And any melee strikes you make while underwater don't take the water penalty. Normally, there's a penalty for using strikes with slashing or bludgeoning weapons underwater, not piercing, but the other two, you won't have that problem. Then there's the invoke. The bearer can swim up to 60 feet as a free action, and this doesn't trigger reactions. I like that we have runes that exist in this way, right? I'm glad that we have water-related spells the same way, right? this is kind of like having water breathing. The passive is exactly what you want and what the party might need if there's going to be any water based activities going on in your campaign. The invoke does mean that you'll lose the water breathing, but it's just meant to be in a case where you just need it really badly. You need to hunt something down really quickly to finish it off, or, maybe you just need to get some people back up to the surface, whatever it may be. It's got a purpose. Is this something you're going to use all the time? I mean, if you're in a purely water campaign, absolutely. And if it's the case, this is S tier. But considering the general campaign doesn't have that much water, it might come up, but it'd be rare. I thought about giving this a C because it doesn't come up that often. However, because when it does come up, this is kind of the perfect thing to have, I'm going to give it a B. It's solid in what it does. It's just what it does you may not need all that often, but it can still absolutely come up. All right, next up we have Cruonign, Rune of Leeching. This is drawn on a slashing or piercing weapon. The passive is strikes made with that weapon deal an additional 3 void damage. After hitting a living creature, the wielder of the weapon gains temporary hit points equal to the void damage that was taken for 1 round. And level +2 adds another 1 void damage. The invoke. A 30-foot line of damage goes out from the wielder. It deals 4d10 void damage to all creatures in the line with a basic fortitude save. As long as any creature takes damage from this, the wielder regains 12 hit points. Any amount of damage, anybody takes it. Level +2 adds another d10 of void damage and another +3 to that healing. And here we have a good example of what you can consider kind of an upgrade of sorts to the slashing piercing rune from level 1. In that case, we had what I consider to be a pretty solid damage boost. But honestly, in many cases, this keeps up with or even surpasses it as the void damage increases a little better than the persistent bleed did, right? Because it was just going up with striking runes. But we also get the survivability here just off the passive, right? We have survivability adding some temporary hit points, which is already an upgrade on its own. So this is nice in that way. Then we have the invoke, and the invoke here is way better than the invoke we had there. Now, the invoke there scaled nicely, well, nicely for the level 1 runes, D8, right, every 2 levels, and it's just against one target, but it was a decent hit. Now we have something that goes up by D10 every 2 levels, doesn't start at a huge number, but it starts at a decent enough number, and we have a pretty long line. Now, normally, I don't love lines, but in this case, you are invoking, and yes, it could be on you, but it could also very much be on an ally. You are going to invoke this and choose the line to come out of that ally or yourself in any direction you want. So, timing it well or placing it well to hit multiple creatures isn't nearly as hard as sometimes we find it to be when setting up lines. Yes, it could be harder depending on how creatures move around, but sometimes they move into a better situation for you to create a line when it comes around to your turn. Or if it is your turn, you can usually set up a line okay. Even just hitting a couple is fine. You deal some decent damage, and then there's the nice hit point regain you get as well. Because this is a combination of damage and survivability, yes, there's some downsides. There's creatures that are immune to void. That happens. You don't want to void heal some undead or something. But generally speaking, I think this is pretty solid, and I like it better than we saw before. And as far as the damage rune, I actually think it does a good job. So I'm going to give this an A, not just because it's better than level 1, because again, they're rated versus each other, but I think it does a good job even at this level, allowing you to do more with some AoE damage, which so far we have struggled with. That brings us to Feikris, Rune of Gravity. This is drawn on a creature wearing armor. The passive is +2 status bonus to athletics checks to grapple, disarm, reposition, shove, or trip creatures, and you can do it up to 2 sizes larger than yourself. So whoever this is on can do it in much a way that we see Titan Wrestler, or 3 if you're legendary. Now, it used to actually give that feat, that general or that skill feat in the playtest. However, giving you and taking away a feat wildly is kind of weird. So instead, they just recreated it here as part of the passive. But that's the idea. Essentially, you've got the Titan Wrestler buff. At level 17, that +2 status bonus becomes a +3 status bonus. The Invoke. All creatures in a 15-foot emanation must make a fortitude save or be pulled 5 feet toward the bearer, or 10 feet on a crit fail. I've seen a lot of value come out of grappling, like most of us do in this game. A +2 status bonus to athletics isn't overly common. It's not unheard of, it certainly happens, but this is a strong buff for grapplers. The Titan Wrestler piece, which is what we really have here, isn't as important. And that's mostly because if you are a grappler, if you're likely to grapple, you probably took it anyway. So you really don't need to double down on it, but some people won't fit it in, and then this is a nice buff for them. Still, this is a great passive and better than a lot of stuff we've seen before. And, this better than some things we're going to see. Assuming the party has a grappler, that is. If the party doesn't have one, this doesn't really have a lot of value. So do keep that in mind. The Invoke has very little to do with grappling, which is interesting. 5 feet is, being able to pull enemies is great. 5 feet is not far to pull them. 10 on a crit fail is these are fine. These are not a bad thing to do. So I can't ignore that. There's just not a ton of movement. There will be times when enemies step away from your fighter or your barbarian, and you can just pull them right back to that ally. And with that, saving that action is actually huge. So there are times when this is going to feel amazing. And there's times when it's going to feel like it wouldn't do anything, so you just don't trigger it, which is fine. Like that's how these are built if you etched it onto an ally. Now, there's the other case where you could trace it onto an enemy, as long as the enemy is wearing armor, and you could pull their other allies toward them to kind of bundle them up. Maybe for your spellcaster is going to drop something horrible on them. I think there's cool things there. I think that's a more rare use. I think it's more likely to use it for the etched reason here, and then occasionally invoke it. I just don't think that invoke's going to come up all the time. And I think if you have a grappler, this is going to feel really good. If you don't have a permanent grappler in the party, I'd probably not take this. Because of that, it kind of jumps between a couple different ratings here. I think this is a solid B. I think there are parties where this is S tier though, which is kind of how B kind of works. That brings us to Germantria, Rune of Partnership. This is drawn on a creature. The passive is when the bearer is within 1 mile of you. When the bearer takes damage, it only takes half the damage and you take the other half. So you're not putting it on yourself, right? It has to go on an ally, and then you're splitting the damage. Now, you can't reduce the damage in any way yourself as the Runesmith, but of course, if your ally took 70 damage and they had resist 10 to that, it would be 60 damage, and you'd be splitting the 60. You wouldn't take half of that original 70 or something. You just don't get to reduce it further. If either of you hits 0 hit points, this ends, and you can no longer invoke it either. Then there's the invoke. Both you and the rune bearer heal 20 hit points. Level +2, this goes up by another 5. I am not usually a fan of the split damage type effects. They're fine, but they don't blow me away. This one has a little added spice though that makes it feel really good, and it's that invocation. There are obvious benefits to splitting damage. Don't get me wrong, right? Slowly whittling 2 down rather than taking 1 down means it's very, very hard for them to drop an ally like this. Now, keep in mind, it's not bidirectional. So if you, the runesmith, gets hit, your ally doesn't take half that damage. So you're going to drop faster than the ally who's got the rune on them will. But assuming that you're not in melee with them, you're probably not as big a threat to dropping like that. And they can certainly take a lot of hits without you doing anything. And then we've got the invoke. Being able to invoke to just heal both of you 20 hit points, yeah, that feels pretty good. You can plan it out perfectly. All right, we're both down 25 hit points. Boom, invoke 20 hit points back. It's almost like, if you etched this early, it's like, hey, I used one action, half an action really, to put us right back to where we had been. And that's going to feel really good. Sometimes you might even decide it's worth 3 actions to distance draw this on an ally and then instantly invoke it and heal you both back 20 points. That's not a ton of healing, but it's not nothing either at level 9. And it goes up okay. Then we have the other side of this. Nothing stops you from using runes outside of combat. I mean, you can just trace this on allies and invoke it, trace it and invoke it, trace it, invoke it 6 seconds at a time. Well, yeah, because you can potentially trace 2 allies and then invoke both those runes at once. Anyway, you can heal the party between combats so fast. It is incredible how fast you can heal up with this. It's not the only time we'll see something like this, by the way, but because the passive is solid and it's something you'd like to have out there to set up a solid invoke that helps you and the ally, the invoke does great healing, and there's an out of combat use of this that is frankly a little bit silly. This is S tier for me. At level 9, I would absolutely take this, and I would become the downtime healer. It's just that good. That brings us to Ichelsu? Ichelsu? I don't know. Rune of Observation. This is drawn on a creature, and the passive here is the target is affected by See the Unseen. See the Unseen makes it so that invisible creatures become just concealed to you, and ghosts that are like hiding within objects and stuff within 10 feet you can find, and you get a +2 status bonus to disbelieve illusion. So there's a lot of pieces to See the Unseen. Not only that, but the bear has all around vision, meaning they cannot be flanked. The invoke. All creatures in 20 feet that were invisible are now concealed, and all those that were concealed for other reasons, they aren't anymore. And this lasts for 2 rounds. That helps everybody. I like this, but I don't love it. Like most of these, it is circumstantial. Not all of these, obviously. There may be no invisible or concealed creatures for several encounters, possibly for days. So, keep that in mind. But it might be worth it, as it does certainly help in those cases when they do exist. It's just hard to say you're going to etch this onto allies at the start of every day. This drastically reduces the chance of struggling with certain kinds of enemies that otherwise you might. So you might just keep this as a trace option. Oftentimes, it's your melee combatants that struggle the most to see those invisible creatures and still have to try to hit them, right? So great, now you can make sure that your melee allies have a much better chance to hit these enemies. And also, they're not going to be flanked, which is another advantage, right? Flanking is a tool that GMs often use with their melee combatants to take on melee marshals and start taking them down because sometimes they can be hard to take down. So this is a solid support rune in that way. Then opening up other enemies to attack is also pretty strong. Invisible, again, just may not come up that often, but you can negate these kind of things for the entire team for 2 rounds, and that is actually pretty impactful. In the right campaign, this is probably A tier, but I think generally speaking, this is B tier. It's something that it's not a bad idea to have it in your repertoire. I just don't know that you're setting it up all the time, but when you are setting it up to use it, you're getting a lot out of it. You just need to find the right situations for it. That brings us to Jurroz. Jurroz? I don't know. Rune of Dragon Fury, drawn on a creature. The passive is whenever a creature strikes or steals from the rune bearer, the creature is off guard for 1 round. Then the invoke. As a free action, the rune bearer can fly up to 60 feet toward a creature that damaged it in the last minute. If the rune bearer ends up adjacent to the creature is then off guard until the end of the bearer's next turn. And if the rune bearer is still in the air at the end of their next turn and has no fly speed, they're going to fall at the end of that turn. This is absolutely nuts on any melee martial character. Creatures are hitting you all the time. So free off guard, pretty much guaranteed, is incredibly strong. And this isn't off guard to the rune bearer. The passive is they are off guard. Flat out. That distinction matters a lot. And it's not just melee strikes that count. Any strike counts. Archers are becoming off guard because they shot your melee marshal who's got this rune on them. Then just let your melee marshal fly over to the archer, make them off guard, and destroy them. Not that the bear even had to be hit with a strike. They can fly to a creature that damaged them at all. The spellcaster threw out AoE. Your one ally with this rune was in that AoE. Guess what, spellcaster? Boom. You're just going to have a barbarian at your face instantly. It doesn't matter if you were up on a ledge or something. This is so far. This movement is so far. Covering this gap is one of the hardest things for melee marshals to do. And again, it doesn't even have to be just them. I just think they're in the best case to do this. And, whether it's on you or you've got it on strictly an ally, this is just incredibly impactful. It's going to work. You're going to want to do this all the time, right? it's going to be hard almost not to trigger the invoke to where you're probably tracing it back on so you can invoke it again and just have them move around the battlefield at extreme pace. This is an A. It's not an S, I don't think. I don't think it's quite strong enough for that, but this is a solid A that I think you'll be happy to have on there. And I think your allies, even outside of the rune bearer, are going to get a lot out of this. So definitely seriously consider this one. That brings us to Kojastri, Rune of Insulation. This is drawn on armor. The passive is the armor wearer gains 4 resistance to either fire, cold, or electricity. Then any creature that hits them with an unarmed or non-reach melee strike takes 2 damage of the same type. Level +2, that goes up by 1 to your resistance and 1 to the damage they take. The Invoke. Any creature who has the bear grabbed, restrained, engulfed, or swallowed makes a basic reflex save against 8d4 damage of the type from the passive that you've got. On a fail, the creature releases the bear as well. Level +2, this goes up by 2d4 damage. I like this one, but not as much as I liked the last one. Resistances are good, and you might have a decent chance to plan out for the right resistance since you don't need to choose start of day necessarily. The thorns damage here is nice to toss on a tank, and it can add up, on 6 to 10 hits, but you're level 9. It's not a huge amount. And this was massively debuffed since the playtest. Like, we've seen some debuffs since the playtest. This one, it had been 2d6 damage by default, and now it is 2. It's a wild debuff on the damage here. 2d6, though, was probably too much. And I prefer a flat amount because you don't want to roll dice all the time. But it could have been more than 2, you're level 9. Anyway, the Invoke sounds like it may not come up much, swallow and engulf. Even restrain may not be that common. They come up, but they're not that common. But grabbed happens all the time. All the time. So many creatures have attacks that are plus grab. And yeah, they're going to use that. They're going to use their next action to grab you. So I actually think there's a reasonable chance you will trigger this a fair amount of the time. But do you want to? The damage isn't terribly low, right? 8d4 on average is about 20. And at level 9, okay, that's a decent hit. It increases at an okay rate. But with the chance to end the condition, you pretty much have to do it, right? So even though you might have preferred to keep the resistance going and maybe the thorns damage, you definitely want to trigger this to get your ally out. So yeah, I think it's a solid enough invoke, and I think the invoke is the stronger piece here. Having said that, I don't think it's the strongest invoke we're going to see. I think sending your ally 60 feet to go hunt down an enemy is a much stronger invoke than getting them out of a grabbed or restrained, which actually the other one would do too. So, eh, but I still think it's good. I think the damage here is fine. I just don't think it's blowing me away. The passive, though, is a little bit weak, and those 3 resistances may never come up. I think this is a B. I don't think you're sad to have it, but I don't think it's as strong as some of the other ones we've seen. That brings us to Oraloq, or Oraloq, I don't know. Rune of inarticulateness. Ugh. I love how hard that was to say, given the rune it is. Sometimes life is just fun that way. Anyway, this is drawn on a creature. The passive is when the rune bearer attempts a skill check with the linguistic trait or tries to cast a spell that doesn't have the subtle trait, that creature has to pass a DC 5 flat check or fail to use it. The Invoke. The bearer has to make a will save, taking 20 mental damage on a fail and double on a crit the next time they use language at all, a linguistic action, or cast a spell without the subtle trait. The bearer is aware of this, though. They know the trade off, and it goes away if it's not triggered by the end of the rune bearer's next turn. Level +2, the damage goes up by 5. Okay, so we have some really interesting damage rune design at level 9. The passive here is pretty cool to throw onto a caster specifically. Keep in mind that there is no save to avoid a rune being traced on you. It just happens. Nothing you can do about it. If on turn 1 you put this on a caster and round 2 you invoke it, you can mess with their ability to cast at all, and yeah, potentially that's a really strong thing to do in combat. A flat check of 5, though, isn't unbeatable. it's just a 20% chance to fail, which most creatures are fine taking that chance. Then we have the damage. 20 damage on a fail, that's not bad, but it's not going to stop a caster at this level from casting a spell. They're just going to cast it and take the damage most of the time. From a player perspective, it's not a terrible trade off, right? Hey, great, you cast that spell, so you get to take 20 damage. That's not bad. But also keep in mind that there is a will save here. And this is really only good against spellcasters who have amazing will saves. I don't know. I just don't think this is going to deliver on the promise. It's not bad, and it can be good disruption, but I won't go higher than a B, right? This is not as good as even debuffs like Stupefied are. I don't know. Back and forth. I almost want to give it a C. You know what? I think I am. I'm going to give it a C. And I'm going to have a lot of people upset with that, but I'm going to give it a C. I don't think it belongs up in that B territory. All right, we have then Piteregrin. Sure. Rune of Transposition. This is drawn on a creature. The rune bearer can use one action to swap places with any other rune bearer in 15 feet that is willing. This is a concentration and teleportation effect. Both creatures must have the space to appear in the other one's new location. Okay? Then the invoke. All creatures adjacent to the rune bearer and the bearer itself that are large or smaller are teleported, and you decide where they end up within a 15-foot emanation of where the rune bearer's original location had been. Unwilling creatures get to make a will save to not be teleported. Teleportation effects are pretty much always a good thing. Swapping two allies is strong. Just keep in mind that the other one, in case I didn't make it very clear, has to be a rune bearer as well, and that may be harder to account for than you'd think. Then again, if you etch a lot of runes, especially by level 9, you're etching 4 runes, that may not be a problem at all. As for the invoke, this is great to help somebody out of danger. And you probably want to use this on an ally who would gain the most from the passive benefit anyway, right? You're going to want this passively on somebody who doesn't want enemies near them. And that way they can swap position with one of your melee marshals who would much rather not walk up to that creature anymore and now just bashes them on their turn. Double win. Well, that's the same creature you want to get out of dodge, right? So you cast this, and they've got 2 enemies up on them, the invoke, I mean, and great. Now you're saying, hey, even if those 2 enemies pass their will save, I can move my ally far enough back that they're free to move on their turn, right? They're not within reactive strike range anymore. Now, if you get to position everybody, great. Put them on far ends, drop the next to your allies that want to hit them. But even if unwilling creatures make their saves, you're saving an ally. So I think both sides of this are good. Neither side is mind blowing. Both are useful. I think you should definitely etch this. This is absolutely an etch case. And I think this is an A. I think moving players around in the battlefield, letting them move themselves, and you moving them is a great combo that I'm all for. All right, we're getting toward the end of these, I promise. We have Trolistri, Rune of Forlorn Sorrow. This is drawn on a creature. The passive is enemies within 20 feet of the rune bearer treat all squares in between as difficult terrain. The invoke. Enemies within 15 feet of the rune bearer must make a will save, becoming slowed 1 for 1 round on a fail or slowed 2 for 1 round on a crit fail, and they're immune for 1 hour after having to make this save once. This is probably our best defensive rune that we've seen at level 9. By far the best defensive rune on a ranged or caster character. The passive is going to make it very challenging for melee enemies to get up close. That is a really solid area of difficult terrain. But it might be better used actually on your tank. The enemies still have to fight to get up there or to even go past your tank. But your tank also is happy to let them come up eventually, working their way up to them before you drop the bomb and try to slow the enemies. Now your tank is just sitting there with 2 slowed enemies that aren't going to accomplish much. That feels pretty good. And keep in mind, this works against flying creatures too, right? So if they're trying to fly through that space, they're going to be slowed on that. And yeah, the invoke really isn't situation at all. You always want to slow enemies. That's never a bad thing. Yes, it's only one chance per fight per creature. That's completely fine. I would probably have this etched on maybe even multiple allies at the same time, triggering against different enemies, obviously, making sure that I'm not wasting triggers of it. But it's strong. It's pretty easy to set up. I don't think it's busted. I don't think it's a must etch, but I think it's a solid choice that you will want, and you like both parts of it. So I'm going to give it an A. This brings us to Ulgatus, Rune of Restraint, drawn on armor. The passive here is when the wearer would gain or increase the value of their enfeebled, drained, or sickened level, they attempt a DC 15 flat check. On success, that doesn't happen. But the rune goes dormant for 10 minutes. The rune can still be invoked even while dormant, and at level 17, the flat check becomes a DC 10. The invoke. For 1 minute, the wearer gains resist 10 to critical hits, and at level 17, it goes up to resist 20. Right. Maybe I'm way off, but I am not impressed by this. The passive gives you a not so good chance to ignore gaining or gaining a level of 3 different conditions. Yay? And if it works, then you might as well invoke because at that point, this does nothing. But maybe you should just invoke it right away? Is that maybe the stronger use of this? Like get into combat and then bam, invoke it? The invoke at least has value. Resist 10 to critical hits damage. Yeah, that definitely helps. At this level, critical hits are, as far as I recall, when running these levels, hitting pretty easily for like 40 damage plus. So it's good, but it's not insane, right? It's not bad. Don't taking a quarter of the damage out is certainly not bad. I don't know. I suppose you could look at this as almost permanent resist 10 to critical damage for everyone if you trigger them in pairs at the start of combat, like take your whole first turn just like triggering off 4 etched characters, right, 2 actions each, or 2 actions to do all those. But again, I don't even know if it's that strong. I think I'd much rather etch other things. And if the best thing we have to offer here is the invoke, because the passive again, I hate it. That gamble is so poor. At level 17, it gets better, but I'm not giving it much credit for that because most people are never going to see that. I'm going to give it a C. I don't like this. I'd love to hear from people who really like this, but I just don't think it's there. And our last level 9 rune is Yudici? Yudici? I don't know. Rune of Remonstrance? Is that a word? Guess it is. Okay. We'll look that up later. This is drawn on a shield. The passive is while the bearer has the shield raised, it provides a +1 AC bonus, circumstance bonus, mind you, to all allies within 10 feet of the bearer. The invoke. The shield regains 40 hit points, and all bearer's allies in 10-foot emanation gain a +1 circumstance bonus to attack rolls and skill checks for 1 round. Then, level +3, the hit points healed to the shield go up by 10. If you watched my last ranking video, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Please do if you haven't. This would make more sense. I like shield related runes, or at least I did in that video. Granting allies an AC boost is obviously good, but the radius here is tiny. I really don't love that. 15 feet doesn't sound like much of an increase, yet we see that in other classes with effects they have. That 15 feet's meaningful. That extra 5 feet actually does matter. Instead, you're probably throwing this onto a tank that maybe is affecting one ally. And at that point, it's fine, but it's not great. I feel like this needed more range on the passive. Again, I don't hate it. I just don't think it's amazing. This is the same issue I have with the Invoke. The range is really small. The boost is great. The shield healing is really good, so you could just do it for that alone and be happy with the Invoke to an extent. Because, heals like this for a shield, you're not finding that. That's not a thing that's coming up. And it may be really critical that every round you're using shield block and it's taking a lot of hit for you. This is a great way to prevent it from breaking. All put together, though, I like it, but it just doesn't quite hit that. So if you take it, if you think it's a nice upgrade toward runes for your shield, great. I think take it. You'll be happy with it. You'll get use out of it, but it's not going to hit as hard for as many allies as you might want it to. So I'm going to give it a B. And I think it's good, but I don't think it's a must take. And that brings us to the very small set of level 17 runes. Keep in mind, we are level 17 now. Things are nuts, right? Spellcasters have ninth level spells. These probably have to be pretty good to want to use them. And the first one up is Aiuen, the Elf Gate Key. This is used on a creature. The passive benefit: once per turn, when the bearer would stride, they teleport the distance instead, which of course means they can teleport in multiple directions. Doesn't have to be, you know, just parallel with the ground. The invocation: you teleport the rune bearer adjacent to any other rune on the same plane of existence. Unwilling creatures get a will save and can at max be moved 60 feet. The special additive here is that if you have the sigil cantrip and you've made any sigils with it, as long as they're on the same plane of existence, you could actually teleport that ally to any sigil. Enemies, though, can still only be teleported that 60 feet, so probably not sending them very far. Again, if you didn't watch my video on the Runesmith generally, I talked about this one. You used to be able to send enemies that fail to save anywhere that you have a sigil, which was a little bit broken and may have made this the strongest possible effect in the game. So, probably good that they debuffed it. Again, we are really high level here. Would I etch this onto an ally? Yeah, I would. The teleportation movement every round definitely comes up, right? Teleporting has value in a lot of ways, including that a teleportation isn't necessarily a move action. And, if you're teleporting instead of striding, basically you're not going to trigger reactive strikes, but you can also get places you can't get with a stride. So that teleportation once around, actually really, really beneficial. Then you've got an emergency button as the Runesmith just to get an ally out of danger, no matter what. And that's huge. Keep in mind that by this point, you could have etched these onto your whole team. Now, on your turn, you can't teleport everybody with one action, but let's say there's 6 of you. If for some reason you all have this etched on you, you could just get everybody to safety on the other side of the world with one turn. So, yeah, that is a ridiculously strong power. Then there's the ability to use it against enemies. Moving an enemy 60 feet where you want them to be is absolutely worth doing. Keep in mind that you're not going to guarantee it because they do get a will save, but there's no incapacitation trait. So there's a decent chance it'll work. And I mean, if I remember correctly, the 60 feet can be in any direction. Just has to be next to one of your runes. So you're probably sending this next to a melee marshal that can deal some serious damage or grapple them or something. But if you planned really well and you've got a sigil you cast somewhere that's scary within 60 feet, it's you've got it as a rock hanging somehow precariously over a gorge, and this is a melee enemy. Sure, teleport them next to it. They're just going to fall to their death. That's probably way harder to pull off, but I'm just saying there's a lot of options here. Still, this isn't broken. This is just really useful. I think it can be used in a lot of ways. It's an A for sure, but it's not S tier. Though I will say the playtest version was triple S. Is that a thing? We'll say triple S. The strongest thing in the game. Ridiculous. Next up is Ochygholl, the Poisoned Star. This is drawn on a creature. The passive is the bearer becomes doomed 1 for 1 round, as do any allies that start their turn adjacent to this creature. Each doomed creature takes 10 mental damage the first time each round it attempts an attack or skill check. Then we have the Invoke. A meteorite falls on the bearer, dealing 3d10 bludgeoning damage in a 10-foot burst, which is centered on one of the corners of the space the creature's in. You get to choose the corner. That's with a basic reflex save. Then it deals 8d6 fire damage in a 40-foot burst centered on that same corner to every creature in the area with a basic reflex save. This has the death trait for any doomed creatures. And here we get a larger AoE that we haven't seen really with any of the other runes. We have seen an AoE, but this is the big one. The passive here is weak. Doomed means almost nothing to an enemy creature, because at most tables, we say creatures are dead when they hit 0 hit points, unless you're intentionally using non lethal attacks. Doomed only matters for death saves, unless you get it to Doomed 4, which this isn't doing. This is giving them Doomed 1. Yes, each doomed creature will take 10 mental damage a turn, but 1, at this level, that is nothing, and 2, lots of creatures are immune to mental damage, especially when you're getting to high level. So it's just weak, in my opinion. I don't like the passive at all. Then we have the Invoke, and this initially feels much better. The damage, if caught by both, right? If you're in the hit area of both, you're going to take on average 44.5 damage, and that's fine. But you aren't blowing anybody away with that damage. Although you can do this over and over and over and over again. Suddenly, that 44.5 damage adds up kind of quickly. Then we have a problem. This is all creatures in these areas. You very likely are hitting allies with this too. The chance of just hitting enemies seems really slim. So you have to kind of balance that. But it can be a lot of damage. And you could just sit back. Not that this is a great way to use your turns or anything, but you could sit back and just, from range, drop out 2 action trace, 1 action invoke, and just keep dropping that out there and just keep dropping bombs. Reasonable if you're hitting a good number of enemies, but I don't think it's amazing. And again, you're probably hurting your allies a lot doing that. So, with a weak passive, but certainly value in the invoke, and it can actually be a strong AoE, I'm going to give it a B. I just think you're level 17. You're not thinking this is nuts. That brings us to Rovan, Seal of the Dead Vault, drawn on a creature. The passive is the bearer takes a minus 20-foot status penalty to land speeds and a minus 40-foot status penalty to all other speeds, including flight. If their flight is reduced to 0, they can't take the fly or arrest a fall actions, which means they're going to plummet. The Invoke has the incapacitation trait, keep that in mind. Ground and a 10-foot emanation around the bearer becomes permanent difficult terrain. The bearer makes a fortitude save and then becomes immune to 24 hours against this save. On a crit success, nothing happens. On a success, the creature is slowed 1 for a round. On a fail, slowed 2 for a round. On a crit fail, slowed 2, restrained, and blinded as they become encased in a sphere of earth. If they can't escape in 3 rounds, they become petrified. This is very cool and is a worthy rune to consider. But it isn't crazy, right? Like what we first saw. This can absolutely shut down an enemy, but those reductions are for just 1 round. The Invoke is strong, having a solid outcome, even on a success. I don't want to play up the crit fail because, look, it's a crit fail with an incapacitation. You're not getting it a lot. This is best on a creature that wants to move around a lot and isn't bulky. Is this stronger than the other things we've seen at level 17? No. I think it's on par with our last one, honestly, in a lot of ways. So I'm going to have to give it a B. Keep in mind, you can potentially give a creature slow 2, a different one, every round, and that's cool. But I don't know that it's worth the effort to get that when there are spells from allies that could hand out things like that in a much larger group, like to all enemies, for a single casting. I just don't think this is strong enough to hold itself up with the better of the runes. And finally, we have Xinsala, the Well of Virtues, drawn on an unoccupied square on the ground. Passive. This creates a 30-foot emanation from the square. Allies in the aura that it creates have a +1 status bonus to ACs against magic, +1 status bonus to saves against magic, and resist 10 to damage from magic effects. The invocation. This is healing and vitality. The rune explodes in a well of healing, allowing you to split 70 hit points between all allies in the aura as you see fit. Could go all to 1, could give 7 allies 10 each, whatever you want to do. Allies in the aura, when it explodes, gain a +20-foot status bonus to their speeds and become quickened for 1 round, and that extra action can be used to stride or strike. So, are you dealing with magical effects a lot? Yeah, of course you are. It's level 17. That's happening all the time. Those are some pretty good bonuses against magical effects in a decently large area. They are status bonuses, so you might be competing with things your bus spellcasters gave to you, but that's okay. That's okay if that's competing with it. This might add something that those spells don't. The damage reduction, of course, nice, not crazy, but it's still good. Then we got the invocation, and I like this invocation, but probably not the way it sounds initially. The 70 hit points mid combat is actually kind of weak. You could drop a 3 action heal spell at this level and heal each ally for about 40 hit points on average, but here you're just splitting 70 between people. It seems a little weak, right? Except that you can do this round after round, and you're not wasting anything to do it. If you really want to, you could spend every round just heal bombing your party. Constant, quickened, constant speed boosts, heal, just round after round after round after round. And that's just in combat. Then you can do this outside of combat. We already talked about healing outside of combat being a little silly. Well, here, just keep tossing it out until everybody's healed up. Takes you, I don't know, a minute between combats to heal everybody up with this. Yeah, that feels pretty good. In fact, that's a little insane. But even just the heal and uh, speed and quicken bombing your party, at least who's ever in the 30-foot emanation, which I remind you is large. That's 30 feet in every direction. That's big. Yeah, this is S tier. This is amazing. I would love to be able to do this. This is so cool. I mean, you can just touch the ground at your feet and blow it up and then do something with your last action every round. And your party will love you for it. So, yeah, definitely think about this one. And there we go. All of our standard style of runes have been rated. And what's left to rate is just diacritic runes. I really wanted to get through these first because I want you to keep these in mind when we talk about the diacritic runes, as those are meant to augment these. That being said, what are your thoughts? Did I underrate, Ulgatus, whatever that was? Maybe you think Xinsala just doesn't deserve an S. Maybe I overrated that. Let me know in the comments below, and as always, adventure on.